Welcome to Wildspire. You get to be a fly on the wall for my intimate conversations with entrepreneurs who are changing the world. I'm your host, Stephanie Benedetto, coach, storyteller, and unmarketer at The Awakened Business, helping coaches and change-making entrepreneurs unleash their inspired message and share it with playful unmarketing. I'll ask curious questions and explore uncharted waters with my guest today. Anything can happen when we step into the unknown of infinite creativity, and that's where we're going to play. My conversation with Linda Katz was a truly magical experience. We got to talk about some of my very favorite things, including transformational storytelling, dream work, and telling a narrative for a more beautiful world. Let me tell you a little bit more about Linda Katz. Linda is a wild feminine soul guide and Koya movement teacher who's been on a quest for the last decade to reclaim her wild. She spent 5 years on the hero's journey, escaping all the external cages she thought were keeping her constrained: job, location, relationship. But after changing nearly everything in her life and realizing that she still didn't feel the wildness she most longed for, she set out on the heroine's descent to dismantle the cage that existed within and free her own wise and wild woman. Through intuitive one-on-one coaching, Koya-inspired movement, dream work, and art, Linda now helps other women dethrone their inner tyrant king and shed their good girl patterns to reclaim their wholeness and remember their inherent wild magic. And if that doesn't inspire you with storytelling and magic, I don't know what does. Linda does a fantastic job when I put her on the spot in this conversation, by the way. So I think you're really going to enjoy meeting Linda Katz. Hi, Linda, and welcome to Wildspire. How are you today?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, I'm really glad that you found me, because every once in a while, a special person like yourself reaches out. I haven't been I've been doing the inviting of my podcast guests because I'm getting picky these days. And every once in a while, someone like you reaches out and it feels right. So I'm really glad that you did. And I'm happy to have you here. And you called me sunshine when you said hello. And all of that, I feel very happy about it. So, yeah.
So glad.
Let me begin. I want to know what dreams are like for you, because I know we were talking about your dream work. And it's something that you do for yourself personally. It sounds like maybe you do that with your clients too sometimes. So tell me about that. What's happening there?
I have had probably since I invited in or asked myself to remember dreams and started sleeping with a journal by my bed, my dream life has been very active. So it's probably been, but it was even before then, because I actually a few years ago found a journal that I took with me to college, like my freshman year. And I wrote down a dream my freshman year of college that, going back and looking at it now, I was like, what? I had these dreams. I had this language when I was 18 years old. Like, even then there was something that was like pulling at me. My dreams are very, they can run the gamut. There's sometimes I remember little snippets. I remember an image. Sometimes it feels like I'm, processing things from the day, processing things through my life, but a lot of the times they'll be quite mythic. And I will remember, like, I can write about a dream and it will be like several pages when I wake up. I'll remember all of the details and all of the conversations. And for me, it's been a really huge way to see what's going on in my own life, to kind of understand what's happening in my psyche, to find I come more from the Marion Woodman approach to dream work, like the Jungian type of dream work. And so I see a lot of like my own masculine and feminine energy, how they're relating within me, I can usually see in dreams. And they can also sometimes they're very validating. They show me like a whole journey, because some nights I'll have a slew of dreams, like 3 in a row. And I'll see how different themes kind of get woven in different ways throughout the dreams, or certain symbols will come up. or even colors or things that are similar from dream to dream. And they've just been such a gift for me. And I love, I'll be like the dream whisperer for my friends. So whenever a friend of mine has a dream, they're like, I had this dream. Can I tell you about it? Because I just love to do that. I love to dive into, they're just so rich. I call them almost like our soul's mother tongue because they speak so much in symbol. And I think a lot of times we can do a bit of a disservice even when we're starting to want to analyze our dreams. And so we want to like pinpoint them. We kind of bring what I call that lens of like the Tyrant King, those like very specific, methodical, scientific eyes to the dream, which can kind of squeeze the lifeblood out of them. And so I think it's this process of like getting to know our dreams, learning to be in relationship with them, allowing them and inviting them to reveal themselves in their own timing. It's just super powerful. Yeah.
It has the feel of a mystery unfolding, like being with the mystery, being in the question of it, like, ooh, and wonder, like, what is this dream showing me? What's happening here that's playing out that is useful for me? Is that how you use it for yourself and with clients? Or like, what would you suggest for someone who's pondering how to use their dreams for this, like as a self-awareness or something? How would you suggest we approach it?
I would say the first aspect is to just invite dreams in. So really, I think it's Toko Paterno calls it creating the invitational presence, like inviting our dreams in so that we can receive them. And then I think just like with any relationship, like starting to actually value them by writing them down, by sharing them with your partner. It's like if we were befriending anything or anyone in the universe, right? We start off slowly. We don't demand that they reveal their hand all at once. We just start by saying, hey, I'm paying attention. Like I'm listening, I'm watching. And that's a good place to start, is simply by writing them down. And then you can start working with noticing, like, what are the symbols that are coming up? I do not utilize like dream dictionaries. So I think that's a very common thing, is like, I dreamt of a snake. Go to Google. What does a snake in my dream mean? And I think it's like, if this is a connection with your own soul, it's so personal. So it's also looking at like, what does it mean to you? How did you feel in the dream? I think that's one of the most important pieces, that sometimes we can get so caught up in the details, and the feeling in the dream can really give us a good indicator of, is there something that we're feeling in our lives? Is there potentially an aspect of feeling that we're not allowing ourselves to feel in our lives? So one of the ways that you can play with dreams is to make every character in the dream a facet of yourself. And so if you have that scary dream, where you're being chased by the monster, or, something, to actually recognize that perhaps some of the feelings, not only of you as the dreamer, but of the monster, is something within you as well. And so it's also deepening your own relationship with those facets of yourself.
That's really interesting. I haven't done a lot lately, but I used to dabble. I like dabble in a lot of little things, and then some of it sticks and comes along with me, or bubbles up here and there. And I'm like, oh, I haven't been moved to do that in a long time for myself, or, with my client playmates. But when I've worked with dreams, I have a friend, Dr. Glenn Livingston, who actually did his PhD on dreams, and he does not believe in the dream dictionary approach, but he has a very rational and analytical mind. And he would kind of pull apart the symbols and what they represent to you personally, like making a list of them, and then start playing with them, like looking for connections. So there was that intuitive side in the way he would interpret, so to speak, but look for a message. And that's a little too analytical for me, and doesn't have the playful energy for me personally that I look for. But what I've done is look at them like stories that you can evolve and play with. So you have these characters, And inevitably there's usually some kind of conflict. I've done this in storytelling transformation sessions too with people, like, okay, we're going to tell stories together and notice how we can shift perspectives. It's fascinating to me that in a story someone tells, just like in a dream, usually they get to a point where they're blocked by something, or there's something that they don't know how to move through, but we're entirely making it up. And even when we're actually telling a story, they'll go, oh, well, the boat won't move. Well, there are a million ways you could move the boat. You could have somebody appear. You could, get a lever. You could have a towboat come along, or I'm using a boat for some reason that's stuck as a metaphor, but but for some reason it doesn't occur to us. And as soon as it does, it's like, whoo, a whole other space opens up.
Yes. Yes. It's like, it's an invitation into the imagination. It's like how much of what we experience as reality is really a limit of what we're capable of imagining might be possible. So it's like, yeah, maybe we're stuck in the boat using your metaphor, and we're not, like it might not even come up to us as an option that somebody appears to help us, which also feels like it's like, oh, what a metaphor for our own lives and our own limiting beliefs and our own experiences potentially, that it's like, oh, I'm stuck. But that option isn't even like available to me, that something might, intervene on my behalf, or that someone comes to help, or that there's like a giant boat that comes in and like tugs your little boat, or whatever it is. It's like we begin to see how, like, I could totally see where you're going with like how we become so stuck in those things just because of our inability to imagine something different.
And I love the metaphor for thought as story, thought as dreams. Like this idea of, we take our thoughts sometimes very seriously. This is what's happening. This is my reality. In fact, it is incredibly powerful. It is how we create our reality. Our thoughts come in and we look out at the world, and that's what we see.
Yeah.
And this is why it's so incredibly changeable. Like one day I can wake up feeling great and the world is beautiful and I'm seeing the sun. And the next day, still sunny, but I have thoughts that feel grumpy and awful. And I look out and it's sunny, but I'm like, oh, I hate this thing. I'm grumpy about that thing, And when we see that that's happening, we begin to notice that we can play with that. And so I like this. I like dream as a playground in the way that you're using it. At least this is what I'm experiencing as you say it, like as an exploratory place of, oh, what's happening and what else is possible? The same way that I often do in story, but that's happening all the time and we don't see it.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. I love what you said there, just in terms of, I think part of it too is with dreams, we can become so hyper-focused on what does it mean? Like which is how we approach so much of life, is like there's one right answer. Like, what's the meaning that the dream is trying to tell me? And it's like, what's one potential meaning that the dream is trying to tell you? Like, it doesn't have to be, but we approach it with such seriousness and this kind of sense of right or wrong, or am I doing it properly? Or that again, it kind of just zaps it of the energy, where when we approach with that playful curiosity, it's like, oh, there can be this facet. And then, I wonder what this dream that I had when I was 18 or 19 meant to me then, versus now I go back in it. I still come back and like revisit that dream ever since I found it. And what it means to me now is very different. And if I look at it when I'm 75, it'll probably mean something else again. And one of those isn't more accurate than the other. There's just these kind of layers of meaning and nuance that we get to dance with. That's another way that I love playing with dreams, which is kind of like, it really helps to get you out of that analytical mind, is to dance your dream.
What is that like? How do you dance your dream?
So just bring it, like I put on a song and then I will literally close my eyes and kind of act out through my body the feeling of different characters in my dream. And it's amazing what will bubble up to the surface that I would not have seen if I was just sitting and kind of writing and doing the thing. It's just like, oh, here's this feeling. Oh, this feels familiar. or, oh, this feels really different, or like, oh, this feels powerful. You get a kind of a more visceral sense of some of the energies that you're playing with in your dreams when you actually bring them down into your body.
That's super cool. So I'm wondering, as we're talking about this, Linda, if there's a connection between the way that you explore the dream world for yourself and other people and the way that you work with the women that you help.
Mm-hmm.
And in that, I'm wondering if you sort of, okay, so correct me if I'm wrong, but because I'm drawing a connection here and I don't know, but like, if you help them move out of their analytical minds and start to engage with themselves, their lives, and in particular their bodies, maybe like what's happening health-wise or emotion-wise or whatever, in a way that's more curious and playful, and like that dance where they're discovering and not looking for a right answer and not looking to fix, but exploring.
Yes. Yes. All of that. I think that coming back into that energy is just something that we're really missing. And, we oftentimes, we do come at it from this place of wanting to fix ourselves or to look for what's wrong. Or, oftentimes in the journey, like I work a lot with people who categorize themselves as kind of the good girl. And I think one of the common hurdles to that along this journey of what I call kind of dethroning the tyrant king and moving from the good girl into the more wise and wild woman energy is that we start to see the good girl. We see all the ways that we have, negated ourselves, how we've kind of been a doormat or put our needs on the back burner. And we meet it with such disgust. Like we meet ourselves with just like, ugh, like I just want to get rid of this. This isn't okay. And we kind of, it takes on that harsh energy versus, like you were saying, with the dream, it's approaching it with like, oh, how fascinating that this is how I adapted or responded to life. And maybe I've outgrown it. And let's just be curious about when it shows up. So instead of coming with that like really harsh lens of judgment, of like, oh, I did it again, like, I'm so stupid. I can't believe I fell into that trap again, like that kind of negative self-talk that is so common, especially I think for women, is instead coming at it with curiosity and compassion of like, oh, how interesting. Like, I didn't say what I wanted to say in that conversation. I wonder why that was. Like, what was it about that particular conversation or where I was in my life or who that conversation was with that perhaps I didn't feel safe saying that or I didn't feel comfortable saying that. So we approach it with like just lightness and curiosity with what's going on and how we're responding and interacting with the world from a sense of really great compassion for ourselves. And there's another word that's not coming to mind, but just trusting as well in our own inherent wisdom, that when those things come up, there's probably a reason that they did. And when we start to like batter ourselves over the head with like, oh, I did it again and I just can't seem to learn, and why does this pattern never go away? We just end up actually further entrenching ourselves in the very thing that we want to move past.
So instead we engage with curiosity and sort of move it and begin to shift gently. I really have the sense of it as you're talking about that. And I'm wondering, Linda, would you tell me, because you use these phrases and we've talked a little bit, so I have an idea of what they mean, but would you tell me a story, maybe not the story, a story of the good girl, the tyrant king, and the wise and wild woman? And like just, a brief story, because they're so evocative. It is very archetypal, right? Yeah. And I'm listening to this and from the frame of, and what if these are all aspects that move through me? And in fact, they must, if I see them externally, since I am constantly creating my reality, they also are happening. They are happening in me. And if it seems like a problem, it's because those thoughts are playing out in me, not because of the external problem that I'm projecting it onto. But anyway, that was rather heady, but tell me the story if you would, and however it occurs
Yeah.
to you to do so. I think that'd be cool.
Yeah. Well, I feel if I were going to tell it as a story, I think it would be that there was a time when there was peace and prosperity and people lived in greater communion with one another, with nature. And then all of a sudden, a king rode in from far and distant lands into our beautiful grove, if you will, of where people were tending the land and just celebrating life with dance and song and stories around the campfire. And the king rode in from distant lands and he looked out and he said, "Oh, this land is really fertile. We could really make this land produce a lot more if we just implemented all of these steps." But in order to do that, we need all of these people to start working and to start doing their jobs. And there's no time for singing and dancing, and those things will come afterwards when all of the work of the day is done. And what happened with some of the women who were in this beautiful once grove was that they responded to the presence of the king in one of two ways. The first was, "Oh, he's kind of big and scary. And you know what? It's probably better for me to just try to keep the peace. Like things feel really uncomfortable right now. I'll just try to keep the peace. So I'm not going to say that I really want to be able to sing while I work, or I won't say that I really love to dance, or that I can speak to the trees, or that it really hurts me somewhere when I see them kill an animal. I'll just I'll push that down and I'll pretend that it's not there so that I can be okay and so that we can maintain kind of some of this equilibrium." Those were the good girls. And then there were the rebels. And the rebels said, "Oh, hell no. This king is not okay. Like we need to fight back against the king using whatever it is that we have in our arsenal to fight back against the king." And they looked at the good girls and they said, "Ugh, how can you be doing this? How can you be like submitting to these demands? Like how horrible." And the good girls looked at them and said, "Wow, they've actually become almost like the king themselves, because there's no time and there's no space for joy anymore in their lives. There's no space for song. There's no place for dance or storytelling, because it's all the defiance of the king and how do we overthrow the king." And so I think that's kind of where what I call the inner cage is. And if I were to say the journey back to the wise and wild woman, perhaps there's a little girl, and she decides, she looks out and she sees what's happened to her aunties and her mothers and her fathers, and just this level of strife, and just how the land is also not as green and lush as it once was. It's starting to become more arid. They're starting to have to spray chemicals on the land to make it produce enough to feed everyone. And so she goes and she just starts to follow this beautiful little red bird into the forest one day and comes upon an enclave of elders, of crones who are sitting in this old cave surrounded by beautiful trees. And she begins to have a relationship with them. So she realizes that, oh, there's something here. The way that I feel when I'm here in this cave, in this forest with these women, is very different from how I feel there, where everything is so tense and wound up and produce, fight, submit. And eventually she asks them, she says, "Could you come help us? Like you live out here and you seem like you're not in the same energetic state that, all of the people in my village are. Like you have something." And so one day she leads back these elders and these crones, and they come back into the village and they just start singing the songs. instead of participating in the submission, instead of participating in the rebellion, they build a fire and they start telling the stories of long before the king was there. And they start inviting more and more people to come listen and more people to come dance around the fire, to remember to celebrate life rather than dominate it. And eventually that is really the energy of the wise and wild woman. I think it's within each and every one of us. We don't have to go out anywhere to get it. It's like we have to go into the wilds of our own bodies, the wilds of our own heart, the kind of cave down in our pelvic bowl, however you want to look at it. Like if your own body, soul, and psyche were this land, it's like we need to venture into places to reclaim that we haven't before.
Mm-hmm. You totally put me in a trance with that, Linda. I'm like, oh, I love stories. I felt so many things in that and could relate to all the characters. What would you like to say about what that means to you and what you see in that story?
I think what I see is redemption in a way. That there is this, when we stay in the confines of the village, staying with the metaphor of the story, then that's all we ever know. And so those are the only options. It kind of comes back to what we were saying, with the boat metaphor. When that's where we are, that's all we know. And so that's all we see. And we don't have the space or the capacity to imagine anymore that there's something different. And so it takes the courage. And oftentimes, I think in some ways the little girl can be a sense of, I think that when we're children, we're a lot of times closer to the wild nature. That's kind of more instinctual before society's kind of piled on all this other stuff on top of it. But I also think there's kind of this energy of the fool in like the most delightful way, that we need to have a bit of that fool energy that is not naive, but is still innocent, because we need to believe that there's another possibility, both for us and for our world. Because I see, like you were saying, like so much I agree that there's like this, like we create our reality, and I feel like it's like our reality creates us. So growing up in the kind of realm of the Tyrant King, those are the archetypes that tend to show up a lot because they're just the water that we're swimming in. And so it takes this kind of innocence or this really childlike hope or curiosity to be willing to kind of go out into the forest and be like, oh my gosh, here's like this beautiful bird. I'm just going to follow this. Like that could be our intuition that leads us right into this new area that we haven't been. And to just, to believe that it can be different. Because I could also see if it was like somebody in their middle years who goes out and hangs out with the crones and learns all this stuff and is like, yeah, but that's never going to happen in the village. The village has been stuck in this pattern for thousands of years. Like, that's never going to change. Like, we need to have that kind of childlike sense of, oh, but why don't you guys come back with me? And like, what if I can bring more of this energy into the world? What if I can be the contributor to bring this energy in?
Mm. That's so beautiful, Linda. There's a book that I'm reading called The More Beautiful World We Know Is Possible by Einstein is his last name, and I can't think of his first name right now. And he has a background in philosophy. And he talks about the old narrative and the new narrative. And the old narrative that we've been living in is the one you're calling, of dominance and the Tyrant King. He calls it the story of separation. it's a narrative of power over, of dominating, right? Of I am separate from you and there's only so much to go around and therefore I will fight for this. Or I'm afraid I won't get enough and I will be subservient so that I can please because I have to get, there's not enough to go around because we are all separate. And I will exert power over. And there are many different ways in which we do that. And that is the narrative that has led us to make choices that are harmful to ourselves, others, and the planet, and not care for it because it looks like everything is separate. And if we go to the spiritual representation of that it's this illusion that we are separate beings, the Maya that says we are not one, that, I am Stephanie, only this personality or this body, and you are Linda and your personality and body, and we are separate from each other. But moving into this new narrative, which he calls the story of interbeing, and it's seeing the illusion of separation, even though we have the experience of it, we connect to the oneness that we are, and that everything that we do sends ripples out into the world, and that we can't correct the problems that we created from the story of the story of separation from the beliefs that came out of separation. So we could create rules that make the companies limit or eliminate their pollution. We can make people recycle. We can make people be kind to each other with rules, but that's all coming from that culture of separation and power over. That the only way to truly, and I'm not saying that those things aren't good ideas to do, by the way, let me just put that in there, because they've helped in some ways, but it doesn't solve the underlying problem, the root of all suffering, which is this idea of separation. So instead, we need to notice that we are one and touch that place. And from that, our true nature emerges, which is not domination. It was something we touched on before we started this conversation, but is, oh, you are part of me. We are one vast, universal, cosmic ecosystem, connected in everything we do. When I really see that, my behavior will be vastly different. Because it's now I'm looking at everything as my family.
Yes. Yeah. And like Marion Woodman calls that the birth of conscious femininity, where it's almost like taking the oneness and then the separation. And then like conscious femininity is like, how do we even hold our separate selves in like a vaster container? Like it's almost like the feminine energy is like how do we still hold the wisdom of the part? It's like in Western medicine is a great example, right? Like you have the heart doctor and you have the liver doctor and you have, like the intestinal or the arm, you break your arm, and like that's all valuable. And when we get so focused on the part that we lose sight of the whole, that's where we've been. That's when I look at it, that's kind of what I see is like, how can we still retain some of the things that are valuable while also like holding the space for paradox almost of separation and oneness, like you were saying, like that they get to coexist. And that can we I think that's really what we're moving towards, hopefully, because that's this, like you said, then we make different choices because we're aware that like there's some connection between us and that like this light of spirit that flows through me, flows through the tree out there, it flows through my dog, it flows through every plant and rock, and we just, we can no longer just use things, like use them for our own ends without really considering and being in gratitude and just recognizing, at least like being conscious of the fact that like, of course we have to eat, like that's a human reality and stuff, so it's like in that space, but instead of being unconscious or feeling guilty, can we move into a space of gratitude and reverence for all of these beautiful creatures and plants that we get to spend our lives with and fellow human beings.
I'm just taking a moment to notice that and the difference between this way of asking for, inviting in. I loved how you used the word invitation to something before, but like, I love the word invitation. Inviting in healing and connection and a new way of being, how different that is from focusing on the problem and needing to fix it, which I'm seeing kind of reflected in all these different levels that we're talking about, whether it's in the healthcare system, our medical system, whether it's in like women as they are creating their lives and trying to fit in or not fit in, fight against, good girl, rebel, right?
Yeah.
Or inviting in a new energy. And I think that it's so very compelling and tempting to focus on the problem and go into the energy that created it, rather than opening up and inviting in something else more desirable. So for example, if you feel like you're in a cage, to open and invite the energy of freedom. And we can do that in story, through metaphor, through a dream. And I can see how you explore that. Or in conversation, we can do it too. And say, oh, what might bring openness here? And now we're being curious and wondering and inviting something in and seeing what shows up, not thinking we know what needs to be done to fix it. And this is such a beautiful, creative process in which it comes from. It's like we can't do that from feeling like we are separate. We can't do that in a moment when we feel like we're all alone. We have to at least allow for the possibility that there's a greater connection available. And there's been a misunderstanding with the dominant narrative of the tyrant king, that, as you're calling it, that our human nature is greedy and self-interested. But what I see is that when I am scared, when I feel threatened, my behavior is either going to be fearful, bringing in things in close, or greedy, or lashing out in anger. All those things make sense when I feel that way.
Yes.
But when I know myself at home, in my body, okay, when I know myself taken care of, my behavior will be different. It will be kind. It will be generous. It will be aware. There may still be mistakes I make. I will probably still have blind spots because I don't know everything, but I'll approach things with openness and curiosity and exploring, because I'm safe enough to do that inside of myself. And that, converse to what people are taught in the Western narrative, that is our true nature, is in when we're in that state of peace. And you had mentioned that, you know, it existed in societies before our current societal conditioning. And I think it's always existed within us, and the possibility has been there. And there are times when we live from it, because that's our default, actually. It's only this narrative that takes us out of it.
Yes. Yes. That gave me the goosebumps, the full body goosies, because it's such a shift. It's almost like when you said that about human nature, like what if human nature isn't what we've been taught? Like what if it's just a response to these kind of dominator systems? Like what if it's a response to like in that I was telling you about the work of Riane Eisler, like what if it's a response to traumas that have been inflicted, that rather than something that is truly innate to who we are? And like how radical to truly to see humanity from that standpoint, that like this is actually, and it's, I mean, I think just hearing you say that, I'm like, I can feel in my own body, in my own experience, the truth of that. Because when I'm in lack, when I'm scared, when something has threatened me, when I'm overly tired, I haven't been taking care of myself, right? Like then these are all things that make me feel small and separate. Then my decisions and my actions come from that energy. They tend to be either, again, the good girl of like collapsing, or they become the rebel and they're extremely reactive. And there's some wisdom in that, but it's like there's also a cost in staying in that space. And just to know that that energy of whether we call it oneness or the wise and wild woman, it's always there. It's just finding those ways that we can access it. And when you were saying, you know, about like creating the invitation, the words that popped up in my mind were like active receptivity. Because it's like we have to make the invitation. Like there is an active part of it. And then there is this opening and just the sense of inviting in even the possibility. So I also teach Koya, and movement is one of my favorite ways to do that, of like, what would that feel like, even in those moments, you know? And I am definitely not into spiritual bypassing. So what I tend to do for myself, and that I invite my clients into, is if they're feeling that way, is to actually put on a song that feels that way. Like however it is that you're feeling, just to give yourself space again with curiosity, with compassion, to acknowledge the truth of your own experience in that moment without making it wrong. Because again, that's how we stay in the freaking cycle over and over, is we make it wrong and we're like, why do I see it this way? Why can't I feel good? It's like, this is just how you feel. It's okay. You're a human being. Sometimes we have crap days. And so it's like to go in, to allow that feeling to have a voice, to validate it for yourself, you know, as an adult woman, to say like, and then I love to like, we do full body shake, like shake out the energy of that in your body, and then invite in how you would like to feel, and to create that invitation of what might be possible. And it's amazing once you start moving and like you put on a song that feels how you'd like to feel, and you're like, oh, after 5 minutes, oftentimes you're like, I feel way more like that. And it's not this engineered thing. It's just like, oh, right, that's always, they're all accessible within us, and we can work with them. We can invite them in ways that are really, I think, honoring of our whole spectrum of our human experience, so that, again, we don't have to, you know, kind of wield this hammer of like, you should feel grateful, you should be happy, you should feel like this and not like that. You know, we just kind of use that like berating energy. And this one's like, this is how I feel. I feel really like angry right now, or I feel really sad about the state of XYZ, is like trusting in your capacity to feel it, to actually feel it and allow it to move through your body, to give it voice, to give it expression, and then to also be willing to see what might be possible if you were to let it go.
There is such a relief for me in the acceptance of what is, that I hear in what you're saying. Like, I feel sad, period. I feel angry, period. It doesn't have to mean something about me, or it doesn't have to mean something is wrong that needs to be changed. And also when I recognize that our human nature is when in that peaceful state, our nature is kind to the best of our ability. You know, like I see that is regenerative, is connected, is creative in so many different ways. It feels so hopeful. And I recognize that because of some of the dominant narrative, it can be seen as very naive and out of touch. But I think that if we listen to it, we can feel the truth of it. And it doesn't mean that there aren't things to be done. It's just coming from a different understanding of what we are. It's coming from a different experience of life that is active receptivity that you're talking about. Like it's being with what is and moving from that place, not out of desperation, but out of inspiration or creativity or exploration. And this is the way that we change the world. And it seems naive only from that old narrative, which feels constrictive and dominating and harsh. And this new narrative, at least the way I'm thinking about it, at least the way it's occurring to me, feels so much more expansive and beautiful and full of hope.
Yeah. Yes. And sometimes, hearing you say that, I was almost, I maybe this is like the more cynical part of me, but is that, using those terms like that's just naive is also a way of shutting it down, right? That's how that dominating system continues to perpetuate itself. It's like, let me put you back in your place where you belong, right? Let's put that, or even just we do that to ourselves, right? Like sometimes people in our lives or the mainstream or whatever we want to call it can do that. And sometimes we have that energy within ourselves. It's like, oh, I'm so naive to believe that this is possible. Or like, we look for all the evidence to the contrary, of which there, of course, will be plenty. But it's like, it's coming from the more I think that we're willing to come from that energy. Like you said, it is so creative and generative. And yeah. And I feel like there's even something, like in the acceptance of what is also this like real kindness towards ourselves. Like you were saying, like, I feel sad, period. I feel angry, period. There's a sense of if we bring the kind of the judgment or the need to fix or change or like that's just that same energy, just again, repurposed. And it's so sneaky because it comes up in so many different ways. And it's like, can we meet ourselves and one another instead with more grace and with more kindness? And I think it's really hard to do that from a genuine place if we don't do that with ourselves first.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I noticed the other day I was struggling, I was feeling both anger outwards towards someone around a what I might call a conflict, and also anger at myself, which looks like guilt. It was inward and outward, both, which same thing, right? Beating myself up, beating this other person up in my mind. Yeah. And I was like, okay, I'd really like to be in love with this person. It was a contemplation. Like, what if I was in love, not in love like romantically, but like, let me be in love with this person. Like I'm in love with a pen in my hand. Like I'm in love alongside them. And I was like, oh, I was not feeling it. I'm like, what's going on? I'm not feeling it. And as I sat with it, I went, oh, I am arguing with reality right now. I have all these shoulds. I shouldn't have. It should have been like this. They should have. They shouldn't have. And as I recognized that, just recognizing I'm stuck in shoulds and I'm not accepting reality was me accepting reality.
Yeah.
So just recognizing I'm in judgment of myself or the other person instead of going, oh, just and trying to resist it. Like I shouldn't be judging them or I want to judge them or however. And it shifted it. And all of a sudden it felt different. And then I was feeling in love with them. Oh, of course. Oh, of course, Stephanie did this because it looked that way to her. And she didn't speak up for herself again when she should have, right? But not without the should. She didn't speak up for herself. Yeah. Of course she didn't. That's how it looked to her. Yeah. And of course this person behaved in the way that they did because that's how it looked to them. And I can be with it. And it just, now I can create something different with this person or with myself.
Yes. Yes. I feel like that is one of the ways that I kind of describe the relationship between the Tyrant King, the good girl, and the rebel. So the Tyrant King, I think, for me, is that energy of should. And when it's kind of trapped in the good girl, we tend to point it at ourselves. You shouldn't have done this. You should do this. You should do that, right? Like it comes to this like self. And when we're in the rebel, we point it outwards. They shouldn't do this. They shouldn't do that. And sometimes they're both coexisting. And there is this like argument that happens, right? That is really that Tyrant King energy of like, I need to control myself. I need to control them. I need to control the whole world. Like, and just the way that you said, like noticing that that was what was present begins the process of melting it down or allowing it to not be so like, "Ugh." It's like, and then a new possibility is born. And it's like, sometimes the work seems complicated and sometimes it's so simple, right? It's just that one moment, that shift of perspective, that noticing of like, oh, here's what's happening. I'm arguing with reality. I'm arguing with reality for myself. I'm arguing with reality for that person. I'm trying to exert an agenda in all ways, shapes, and forms, and then resisting when that agenda doesn't come to fruition because life doesn't dance to our agenda. We have a Swedish saying, it's like life doesn't dance to your pipe, which I think is like life doesn't dance to your flute is probably a better way of saying it. And that's that. And we cause so much extra tension and suffering by expecting that things are just going to go the way that we think that they should.
Mm.
And then we break out of relationship, I think, is the other piece. Like you were saying, like that being in love is like, oh, then you get to return to relationship with yourself. Then you get to return to some form of relationship with the other person. And from there, you can make a different decision.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I'd like to ask you, Linda, what is the most beautiful thing you've been seeing lately?
The most beautiful thing. Oh, I think it's there's this groundswell of energy of people, of women who are looking for new ways of being, who are really beginning to question that narrative. And it's just, it brings me just like, my whole face lights up. It like brings me such joy to see when women begin to come home to themselves and to begin to like, it's like our logical minds always look for evidence, right? So there's that part of my logical mind that wants to look for evidence that like, oh yeah, this is possible. And so every time I see something like that where it's like, oh, making a different decision, like standing for the things that really matter to us. Like when I start to feel alone, then I'm like, oh, like no one cares. There's like this like, oh, it's too big. The problems are too big. And like, I either fight it or I collapse underneath it. It's like one of those two. Like that's the old pattern. And then I remember that it's like, but we're not in this alone. Like there's so many who are beginning to really question that this narrative of this way of being of the tyrant king, they're like, it's coming to the end of his reign. Like it's not possible anymore. Like, and it's to see the birth of possibility, I think is the most beautiful thing that I've seen. Because it just fills me with hope. It reminds me that I'm like, there's lots of us and we're all like, it's like we're a web or, where it's like we each have all these little nodes. And so sometimes we forget that there are others. And then when we see them, it's like the whole web lights up and you're like, oh, like that is just, and I think that's what's also so needed is that community. At least I think for all of us, but I would say at least for me, I can only speak for myself, that sense of community, that it's like to remember that it's like, oh, things are shifting.
Mm. Thank you. That is very beautiful. So Linda, if there is a woman who's listening to this, who is moved to look for, be part of the birth of possibilities, to look for something new, even if she doesn't feel like she's seeing it right now, and she wants to reach out to you, where's the best place she can find you?
The best place would probably be my website, which is singingbirdcoaching.com. And I'm fairly active on Instagram as well, also under Singing Bird Coaching. You can sign up for my newsletter there. And I'm offering workshops on uncaging the wildness within a couple times this fall. And yeah, offer one-on-one coaching as well.
cool. And I will include those links beneath this podcast on the blog post as well. Awesome. Thank you so much, Linda. This has been beautiful. I feel like you wove some gorgeous stories of hope, stories of regeneration, stories of possibility that are alive in me. And we got to sort of tell them together. And I believe that every time we do that, that is creating them. That is sending out those ripples, those invisible ripples that we can't see in the cosmic pond that we are. Thanks so much for joining me for today's Wildspire conversation. If you'd like to receive a weekly Wildspire email from me filled with inspiring stories, unmarketing experiments, tips for playing your way to impact and income without the hustle and hype, insights from my spiritual business journey, and more, go to theawakenedbusiness.com/Wildspire. Until next time, may you know yourself as the gorgeous wild creation you are.